Welcome to Fantasy Femme Fatales, where two fantasy readers dive headfirst into the worlds of romantasy and dark romance. From fantasy deep dives to book club banter, we're talking plot, magic systems, and all the spicy details. So pour a drink, grab your latest obsession, and let's turn the page together.
Episode 2, Anathema. Oh my God, this has been a long time coming. I think we said this last time, but for everyone listening, it's just past Christmas holidays, and we are so ready to get back into talking about Anathema because we've been stretching it out and we're dying over here. So today, we're going to talk about the second half of part 1, aka Shadow Daddy Zevander shows up. We had to bite our tongues in the last episode to focus on Maevyth. Today, we get to talk about Zevander. If you're just listening now, don't miss the first episode we recorded. We covered all of Maevyth's POV, and there were a lot of important elements to the story and the world that's been presented so far that we talked about. So go check that out if you haven't listened yet, and then join us back here. So as we mentioned in the last episode, Keri Lake is giving us like rich environments. There's prophecies and like a whole slew of characters and species and lineages that are being described in part 1. There are a bunch of mysterious moments that are happening, and it's really feeling like it's all going to come together by the end of this story. So that is why we are really taking our time with this book. We don't want to miss a beat, and we don't want you to either. So part 1, Zevander. This is where we're headed today. So Zevander's world, and just like the arc we were getting with Maevyth's part 1 episode, Keri Lake is laying some strong foundation here. We're getting like dark and this like brooding MMC right away for us to enjoy. So we're going to recap. We're going to talk about Zevander for the whole episode and theorize on the content connected to Zevander in part 1.
I am so pumped for this. I feel like it has been a long time coming. It was so hard, and I think, Sarah, you can probably attest to this. It was so hard not to talk about Zevander in last episode. Definitely a lot to cover today. But last episode, we did cover the prologue, and I think it is worth rehashing that a little bit, or at least touching on it again quickly. That was really our first peek into Zevander's origin story before we got to meet him in real time. So in the prologue, we learned about Zevander's curse, his connection to Cadavros, and the bargain that was made between him and Zevander's parents to hopefully shield them from the Selasians, which is also a bargain that poor Branimir also fell victim to. The next time we meet Zevander in his official chapters, he is no longer a little baby, but a certified shadow daddy, and we are here for it. So from the book, there's this excerpt, a demon. He was evil after all. Only a soulless creature could take life so swiftly and easily as he did. No remorse, no emotion, nothing but a trained animal forged from pain and suffering. So definitely intense. I feel like this quote is interesting, especially with the word Keri Lake used, forged. I think that's kind of referring to his curse manifesting in Sablefire, which I feel just kind of alludes back to Keri Lake's writing style. Everything that she writes is super intentional. So really excited to see how this comes together throughout the rest of Zevander's story. And we also get this sigil within the chapter, the scorpion and the two flames, which we'll come to learn throughout the book is connected to Zevander's magic. We also learn that Zevander is part of the Letales, an assassin for the crown, and basically a tool used by the king. Zevander assassinates a Lunaseer mage, defying the king's authority, and in the process produces a bloodstone from the body's remains. Zevander is a little bit of a rebel, and if he were caught, could risk execution by the crown. So really at this stage, we're just getting Zevander. The perspective of him is kind of a tool, and not too much humanity has been brought to his character. It also seems to be positioning him as some sort of pawn or martyr in the book. not just to the king as a Letalese, but also to his curse. But this is also the first time that we're seeing him wield his powers as a blood mage, right? And so if we think back to the prologue, this could have to do with some of the markings or the sigil on his body that preserved his power as a blood mage instead of eradicating it like we saw with Brandomir. So I'm curious to see what happens with that. I feel like it isn't a coincidence that he's still able to wield his blood mage powers or his lunaseer powers, what have you.
Yeah, I think kind of immediately we're getting this feeling like Zevander is a weapon. He is a tool that's being used by the king, and I don't think it's a coincidence that we get this small bit of Zevander among so much Maevyth content. It's almost like he's being positioned to be this evil, scary entity when we know there's going to be more to the story than that. And like you said, no humanity that we can see so far.
But I'm kind of here for it. It's like the blueprint of a shadow daddy. We need that initial allure. If we don't get that broody darkness, like Keri Lake has done really well with Zevander, it kind of misses the mark for me. I don't feel as excited about the male main character. I don't feel as intrigued. So Zevander's got my attention.
From my point of view, Zevander gets introduced and I felt like, I think you don't want me to like him. And so far, very early in part 1, but so far it's like he's just kind of a scary guy and he's big and he's manly. And so obviously, you know, that's going to evolve. So we don't get a ton kind of right off the bat. But beyond that first introduction, we do learn quite a bit more about Zevander. And his plotline is pretty intriguing. It's very different from where Maevyth's story is going. So we witness Zevander heading into a tavern, and he's getting quite a reaction from the villagers. He clearly has a reputation of darkness, which is really interesting when we contrast that with Maevyth, who's also perceived as cursed and connected to death and darkness by the people she lives with and around, while Zevander is feared almost to the point of being respected. People just kind of stay away from him, whereas Maevyth is kind of like a burden or a virus. Zevander enters this tavern, and we meet Dolian Javeries, a respected member of the elite magistroli with a specialty in interpreting ancient codices and scrolls. He was previously a mage for the king and has the gift of foresight, which offers him visions. He also appears to maybe have like a drinking problem or something, or an ailment. There's suggestions that his visions are not very reliable, but we learn that Dolian is collecting these bloodstones, one for each of the lives that Zevander has taken on his mission, and with the hope that Dolian can forge a septimere, a scepter believed to have the power to banish Zevander's Sablefire curse. So this is giving us a lot right off the bat. We now know that Zevander no longer wants to have this Sablefire in him, for the little that we know about it. Before that, we really only knew he was cursed, and we don't really know how it's affecting him, but this is really telling us where Zevander's kind of motivations lie. And in this exchange, Dolian shares with Zevander a recent vision that he's had. In it, there's a prophetic glimpse of Hag's Mist, which is the forest near the Umbravale on the Aetherian side, the portal to the mortal world where we know that Maevyth lives. So the vision is of this forest. It's depicting mist, this shimmering kind of veil, and a stone with silver markings, indicating the 7th bloodline linked to a mortal bloodline, which is critical to completing this septimere, this tool. So we know this bloodstone now is connected to a mortal life. It's the 7th and the final bloodstone that's needed. And we're learning more about the Aetherian view of Mortasia, where Maevyth lives. It's perceived by those of Aethyria to be deadly, desolate, full of disease. Not really the picture that we got when we met Maevyth and her whole creepy family, but we see this commonality. The groups that live on either side of the forest are both being told that what lives beyond the border is unsafe and cannot be explored. Now, Zevander is on this mission, so he must take the risk and go beyond this border if he wants to fulfill this mission and rid himself of the curse. And luckily for him, Dolian has a passage spell that he can use to get through that barrier. So Dolian describes a scene. He describes a place that sounds a whole lot like Maevyth's house. he talks about this bedroom window overlooking a forest, and Dolian offers Zevander some Vivicantum, the magic element that we know is required by all Mancers to sustain their magic. And then he gives him that spell that's going to allow him to pass through the ward at Hagsmith to go and find his next victim, whomever that might be. So we get a lot right there. Kara, I want to get your kind of like immediate thoughts, just kind of hearing that all back again. What did that bring up for you?
Dolian feels like such a wild card to me at this stage. It's not clear to me how the Septimir could possibly cure Zevander's curse or do anything. Like we're kind of in the dark as it relates to how that's going to be the cure-all. And I just can't help but wonder, because of Dolian and his sort of personality or initial impression that I'm getting, it seems like it could be in good conscience. It could not be in good conscience. But this is where the story really starts to heat up for me, because I'm starting to see how those two stories may start to converge between Maevyth and Zevander. And I was waiting for this for so long, just kind of following both of their stories side by side. I wanted to see how that was going to finally connect. And I'm excited to see that this is going somewhere with the help of Dolian.
I think you make a really interesting point. Like something that I hadn't thought about before is like, we're just kind of asked to assume that the Septimir has the answer, but what confidence do we have that by banishing the curse from Zevander that like he's going to come out okay? Like there's really, there's so much mystery around it. And I don't know, I think of other stories and I think it's not often that you get kind of like scot-free with these sorts of things. Like there's one quick and easy solution and everyone lives happily ever after. So I think you make some good points on our unreliable Dolian, who I know this is just our introduction, but like I do love him. Like I just think he feels like my parallel Crone Witch, like very different vibes, but just the things he's giving to the story and his intentions feel good, even though he could be wrong anyway. Makes me really like him.
Right? Very type B chaotic energy.
Yeah. He's like our supportive fairy godmother. So another element that we notice here is that we get this kind of parallel. This is a connection point. So the vision that Dolian describes has a lot of the same elements as the vision that Maevyth had, talking about that space between Hagsmiths and the Umbravale and kind of the eerie darkness that lies beyond. And if we remember back, she had that dream that was like sounded like a wizard or a mage or some man and a woman, and he threw her off the edge of the world was kind of what happened. So I think maybe Dolian is just not that good at interpreting these visions, but he's got some vision. So like we're going to hope that he's a bit reliable.
I think he has potential, but just the way that I envision him like prophesizing these things is very like borderline schizophrenic, out there kind of guy. But I believe in him. We've read this far. He knows things. He's somehow prophesized something about Maevyth's world. Can only hope for the best at this stage, right?
Yeah, he used to work for the king. He's part of this magistrally, which we haven't really learned a lot about yet, but we'll learn that they're kind of like the king's mages. So he's got to have some skills. Hopefully he's got some left. He clearly lost his job. So we don't know what happened there, but
I could probably get an idea just based on the small little tidbits that we know about his character so far.
yeah. Yeah. I don't think Zevander is buying it either, I will say. I think we get the feeling in this tavern exchange that Zevander knows exactly what he's in it for and what he's willing to do. He knows he's got the passage spell. He knows that the risk is kind of worth the reward, but otherwise he's keeping Dolian at a bit of an arm's length in terms of his confidence.
Yeah, I think he's kind of a mix between skeptical and desperate
Yeah.
at this stage to find something to get rid of this curse. I know there was mention at some point through part 1 that he's looked everywhere for a potential solution or way to break the curse. So I think as we go, we'll hear a little bit more, maybe some breadcrumbs about his curse, the bloodstones, and Dolian's intentions. But for now, Zevander leaves from Dolian and we witness him saving a boy's life. Then we follow Zevander as he retrieves his sister, Rikeia, from a brothel. So at this stage, we are starting to see some of Zevander's humanity shine through his hard exterior. The child he saves is called Anilavir. So these are people who have lost their magic due to a lack of vivicantum. So starting to see a little bit of a glimpse of the class divide, a little bit of the rich versus the poor in Aethyria under the rule of the king. Zevander heads back to Eidolon's keep, his ancestral castle, with his sister Rakea. Sarah had some possible connections here. So we have Eidolon, an idealized person or thing, a phantom, an image without real existence. Or Greek etymology, a spirit image of a living or dead person, phantom lookalike of the human form.
Something I caught was like they talk about how this property has been in the family for years, but Zevander's last name is Rydane. So it's kind of like interesting. It made me wonder, like it made me want to dig into his mom a bit. Is it possible that it's like her family's property? Maybe she had the more powerful family as compared to her husband. And that's why it's called Eidolon's Keep. Like it just seems like one of those names. Maybe it just carried down generations. I don't know, but it's not connected to his namesake.
And then, of course, we get the infamous bath scene, which definitely had the power to be incredibly steamy, but instead we got trauma. So really appreciating Keri Lake for that one. Feeling like she's going to make us wait for the good stuff. But during this bath, Zevander hears voices whispering, "More Summonet," which means death awaits. And at this point, we go into a flashback in Zevander's mind where he remembers his imprisonment under the Bellatrix, a sadistic band of female warriors who enjoy abusing young boys and are loyal to the Salassian king. So very real trauma coming up for poor Zevander here. But strangely, at the same time, he's also horny and aroused. And we learn that Zevander and the torture that he has endured and what Keri Lake called 10 rods that were pierced on his penis were given as a piercing for every decade that he was imprisoned under the Bellatrix. When I originally chatted with Sarah about this, both of us were really confused. And I'm glad that I wasn't the only one that felt this way. But I pictured these as big, long poles for some reason. Like we thought that they were just like big, massive
I think they were
rods.
odds. Yeah.
And so I don't know about you, but I like a rod is like a big rod. I was not prepared for it to be a piercing. I think we kind of had to come to the conclusion that it's probably some piercings and not these big rods.
I was like, how does he literally do anything with like these big metal things that I would imagine are
Right?
I will say that this scene was like there was a bit of shock value. There was a bit of a like, okay, this is a different side of the kind of horror gothic story that we've dove into here. We are getting a little bit of that here, but then also just feeling like if I can provide a like mini criticism, it was like this was just not super clear. This could have been a bit easier to envision without it feeling like this kind of crazy thing where I just had to decide. It would make a lot more sense if they were piercings. I think they're just piercings, and then that is in fact what it is.
Agreed. Yeah, the poles was a bit much for me. Took me out of it a little. Started to feel like he could be a bit of an alien or something. Um, so not the steamy bath scene that I was hoping for at first glance.
Yeah.
But
A poor, horny, pulled up Zevander, you know?
yes. But through the pole situation, we do find out that Zevander, because of these piercings, he has deprived himself or has been unable to act sexually since he was imprisoned. So he's not happy about that. Obviously, has something to do about the trauma. And during this flashback, we learn more about his scorpion sigil, how he's always felt a bond with them. We get another flashback, this time revealing his older brother, Branimir, the unfortunate failed sacrifice to Cadavros, being kept alive in this dungeon, spider infested den. Branimir begs to be left to starve, and of course, his brother, Zevander, denies him, and he attacks Zevander, unleashing these venomous spiders that unfortunately force Zevander to manifest a terrifying inner beast. So that was a lot. There was like 5 flashbacks in one there. And it's unclear right now if that confrontation with Branimir actually killed him. So we'll just have to wait it out and see if there's more to this. But Zevander is being tormented with a shit ton of memories. He feels these vein scars and the remnants of the curse inch toward his heart, threatening to corrupt him as they did Branimir. And to try and get a rein on this, he cuts his thigh, which is seemingly the only way for him to release some of that tension that's built up and the progress of the curse. So in the book, it's described as these deep black veins branching from a black crevice that ran along his cheek, the unsightly black scar he had since he was a child. The branches crawled down his neck to his collarbone and left shoulder. The curse that corrupted his blood. It longed to turn him into the same vile creature that claimed his older brother. And here we learn why he is so desperate to get the final bloodstone for the scepter. Woof.
Yeah. So now we know who Zevander is. Just a little bit, right?
And we know about the poles.
Oh my God, you're not going to forget about those polls. And if there's anything that we're going to be hanging on for pages and pages is until we figure out how the hell someone's going to work around these polls.
And I love that. I love this angsty energy. Like, we know he hasn't been with anyone or entertained anything in a long time. And so what's to come is probably, if I had to prophesize, angsty and intense. And I can't wait for that.
Sexually frustrated. We're going to say maybe the grumpiness could be in part due to the frustration.
All right. So trying to parse through that was a lot. Something I found really interesting though is throughout this chapter and like even like the cutting, it's clear that he's facing some sort of internal battle with the curse and his ability to wield sable fire. I don't know that we included this, but earlier he attacks these men trying to harm that boy he saves, Gavroche, the Nilavir boy, and his struggle to keep the flames in check during that scene. And now we're seeing it with how he actually cuts himself to release some of that torment.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like this could be an interesting parallel to trauma. Like just in general, his like thoughts around like the curse. We know trauma left unchecked can wreak havoc on our bodies and mental state, cause a multitude of problems. And so I'm just curious, like, could his efforts to suppress his curse actually be worsening its effects rather than if he learned to embrace or navigate it somehow? Right?
Super interesting. And even just like the trauma itself could be manifesting and progressing this thing. I mean, I don't know what other like choices he has, unfortunately, but it is like an interesting parallel to think about him not finding a healthy way to release this energy, this curse. Instead, he's like harming himself.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. And even in Maevyth's part, like how she's always been told that she's cursed. There's definitely some like twin flame, like connected energies happening here with the two of them.
You're getting these two different like human dynamics of struggling to not have an identity and like a place to feel good about yourself.
Yeah. And at this stage, he doesn't really know about Maevyth either. And he heard in his vision, what was it? More Semnet, death awaits. And so at this stage, like we kind of know Maevyth is cursed, right? Like she's connected to death in some way. But he's just probably sitting in the bathtub like, oh shit.
He does get kind of like overwhelmed. And it's like he hears that message and then he gets all these like glimpses of his trauma and it triggers something in him. I'm curious, when he cut his leg, I was trying to figure out like what is going on here. Is he releasing magic? Is the release of his blood somehow like tampering down this curse? Is there literal black blood in him that he is like relieving himself of, like a wound? You know, like what is that process of release? Or is it literal self-harm?
This is just a theory I randomly thought up, but he's not supposed to be able to use his blood magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he still can. So could his release of this blood actually, it's being described as quelling the curse or like reducing the torment of it. So could that be like the sable fire and his blood kind of going at it for prominence in his body. I don't know. There could be something there.
Yeah. I think we're just kind of getting that first little taste
Mhm.
of what Zevander's magic really looks like. So, a couple thoughts and questions came up for me when I was going through this section. This idea of him living in Eidolon's Keep, which sounds a little spooky, but it also sounds pretty amazing. Like, it sounds like big and kind of luxurious in the dark, Keri, like gothic way that she describes things. So, it was kind of leading me to this place of freedom and like, is he still free? It sounds like the king maybe rescued him from these Salassians, but to go from one group of warriors to being a king's assassin and having his childhood home to be where he lives, is he really free at the end of the day? Or is he just getting enough freedom to survive?
It feels like he's a slave to his body, this curse. And he is in this situation where not only does he need to save himself, but possibly also Brandomir. And then he's also got to do the king's bidding, whatever the king wants. So I don't know that he's free. And then of course he's got his sister Rykea who's in and out of the brothel. So he's just a selfless man, I guess, at this point.
I think it paints a really interesting picture from like a physical restraint or being caged like an animal to something that is not so physical, but still very much being a prisoner. And it makes me wonder, knowing what we know, if him and Dolian can create this Septimir, and if Zevander can be freed of this curse, what does it look like for him to be free? Like, can he just run off into the distance and not have this curse and not work for the king anymore? Like, what's the plan? You know?
They move in with the crone witch.
Are they going into the trench? I think it is the desperation you mentioned. It's like he just has to do something about it. He has to try to survive, but even surviving doesn't look like there's a whole lot of potential for him to live like a really happy life. Like, I don't know what he would do and where he would go. Okay, last question. Do we think that the veins that Zevander has, these like dark kind of branch-like veins that he describes on his face and his body, could be linked to Maevyth's markings at all? Maevyth's scars seem to be similar in essence to Zevander's veins, but it paints this picture as maybe she could be the silver and the light and he is the dark, because her scars are described as having a bit of like a darkness, but they're like a silvery branch that does, suggest a connection to the silver lined stone, that's for sure. But interesting that we have these two characters that both have these kind of like physical presentations of what they're dealing with, and we're getting these kind of polarizing visuals from.
100%. I definitely think that they're connected somehow. I mean, we know that Maevyth is somehow connected to this goddess of death, and we know that something happened to Zevander to protect him from being completely consumed by stable fire. So I almost feel like whatever is divinely protecting Zevander has manifested inside of him, similarly to how Maevyth is in the same situation with this goddess of death. So I almost wonder if there's like this kindred connection that's, like you said, almost opposites of them, but still a connection nonetheless. So I like the theory that it could be dark and light, yin and yang.
Yeah, I like what you said there. I think that's an interesting way to think about it. I think we're also being told that what has been done to these two has like seeped deep into who they are. It is not just like a cut. It is not just a mark. They are like probably intentionally vein-like so that it feels like they have become part of you and dug roots into both of these two. So I think there's that commonality too. But I think we are getting set up for some sort of complementary energy between these two who have yet to meet.
When their stories finally converge.
Yes. Okay. So what a buildup for Zevander. So much to think about. But then we get a little bit of action. Is starting his mission. And we see Zevander next when he is approaching Hagsmist. It's guarded by the Umbravale, this magical archway. And it's the only thing that separates Aethyria from the mortal world. Only the blood of the 7 bloodlines, those he'd already killed for their bloodstone, could have passed through freely without a spell. It was their ancestral blood magic that had crafted the Umbravale, and anyone else would have risked falling over the cliff that separated Hagsmist from the mortal lands, an abyssal trench between the two worlds, bridged only by the Umbravale. But thanks to a spell from Dolian, he can pass through unharmed. So good news for Zevander. He's good, but clearly a lot going on with this Umbravale from now and the past. So Zevander passes through and he notices blood on the bone arch. We think we know where that came from. He runs his fingers along it and the blood pulls together and then turns into a little baby bloodstone with silver lines on the surface, mirroring the description Dolian gave in the tavern of what they are looking for. So at this moment, we also learn that blood is a powerful aphrodisiac for Zevander. So this blood that turns Zevander on then also becomes very obedient. It's clearly also a fan of Zevander's dark masculine energy, and it creates a nice little trail for Zevander to follow and leads him into the Bronwick home where he lets himself in. Why not? And he follows the trail directly into Maevyth's bedroom where she's sleeping. And immediately he's captivated by her scent. She is described as smelling of oranges and these beautiful things like I would like to smell like. He notices beside her bed this ominous black-scaled egg, this egg that we knew from before. And he picks it up and he uses his magic to sense that something's living inside of the egg. And we know that this is going to be Ravox, our friend we talked about in our last episode. Now, driven by a desire to obtain this final stone, he attempts to use his magic to kill Maevyth, but Zevander finds himself strangely attracted to her, including the small moans from the heat he's directing into her. He tries to inject more heat into her veins, and somehow the heat is returned to him and he feels it burn beneath his skin. His powers are failing to work as he expected, and every time he tries to hurt her, he fails. His powers are just straight up refusing to follow his commands, and he even beckons the scorpions only for them to sting him instead, which we just learned is why he likes scorpions, because they've never stung him. His thoughts in his head looking at Maevyth describe her with the words, "She held such a purity and innocence about her, a vibrancy that taunted the darkest corners of his soul." So he gets a little desperate. You know, he wants her. He needs to kill her. He's just trying to do what he's there to do. So he pulls out a knife, holds it to her throat, and thinks to himself, "She opened her eyes to reveal beautiful, pale gray irises, the color of morning skies in wintertide, the left marred with a streak of silver that reminded him of the moon he'd seen earlier." He holds the knife to her neck and fails to kill her and vanishes. So thank God they've met. Can we just say that first off?
That was so hard to keep those stories apart, but I don't know how we would have put it together into one single episode. This is a lot though. Like the first meeting and he's literally hard for Maevyth. That's what we get from the get-go.
He's hard for oranges. He likes those oranges. Him describing her eyes as beautiful like the skies of wintertide is like, okay, Zevander. Like, I don't know you that well, but this poetry does not seem like something that's going through your head every day. This seems different.
Is it wrong that I really like the blood aphrodisiac thing? Like, I want to see where this goes. It makes sense. He's a blood mage.
Yeah. Yep. He's into it, but he kind of comes across as like a sexually frustrated teenager who can't get what he wants in this scene. And I'm not mad about it. I think we do need a little bit of this like push-pull tension between Zevander giving this like super masculine, arrogant energy and him not getting his way, and Maevyth just kind of like being there and somehow like screwing things up for him. Like, the tension is tensing and it's just day one.
I'm here for the yearning. I can imagine that we're going to get a whole heck of a lot of yearning from these two. But even right off the bat, we're starting to see how Maevyth is going to be his kryptonite. For sure. It feels like regardless of the scepter, this should be a sign to him that she might have powers to have a hand in helping him with the curse.
Now, a couple questions here. When I read this part and he like holds the egg and he casts his magic around it and he sees there's something inside of it, Zevander leaves, and then the next interaction we get with Maevyth, Ravox like starts hatching. And it made me wonder if Zevander nudged that process unknowingly, if his magic was connected to this, whatever it is, a Corvagon hatching. Like, maybe it needed both of them in order to come to life.
Ooh, mommy and daddy.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see it. I feel like there's so many things pointing to them being mates or something, like some sort of twin flame connection at this point that I wouldn't doubt it. Like whose blood magically follows a path to the house where you live? Like, I don't know.
Right.
I could see it happening 100%.
We're also led to believe that the Corvugon, like the Ravox creature, is an old animal. Like it's not just like a raven. And so it would kind of make sense that if there's some very like ancient magic, ancient weirding things going on between these two, that they would have the potential to like bring this little guy to life. Like it makes me think of Game of Thrones when like Daenerys is the one who can bring those dragons to life. She can make them hatch. She's the only one because she has this like old true blood.
Yeah, there's definitely something here with the old gods coming to fruition. And every time, I swear my Kindle is so highlighted right now because there's juice in every page that is being read. Like there's too much. There's too much, dare I say. You can't even get a page without getting like a little hint of something or even just a word like forged. I feel like she's putting these little sprinkles in there for us.
Mm-hmm. So, on that note, we get a tiny little whisper of something that I think our listeners should pay attention to in this little scene with Zevander and Maevyth, and that is how she responds when he is trying to kill her might be a little bit of a clue of how things could potentially evolve. So maybe just make a little mental note and reread that scene again and see if you pick anything up.
I love it. I can't wait. Our very first semi spicy scene, but Zevander gets called away as he receives a official request from the king. Zevander, his task from the king, he has to go and find the escaped magistroli, our boy Dolian, and kill him. Right now, he can't tell his fellow Letalis or the king about his super secret Bloodstone side mission with Dolian. So he just sort of has to go along with it. And so Zevander and his other Letalis friend Kaz, they head off to go find Dolian and end up facing off against some Carnificans in their journey before finally tracking down Dolian. Eventually, Zevander has no choice but to tell Casimir that he's not planning to actually kill Dolian, but will keep him in the dungeons of Eidolon so they can create the Septimere and break his curse. Dolian shares some additional disturbing visions. Who knows? Who knows what's right and what's wrong with Dolian? But he foretells that, in his words, you will join Cadavros in his destruction. He also speaks of visions of the Corvgon, messengers of the dead, believed to have been the beloved pets of the goddess of death, described as raptors with teeth and claws designed for tearing flesh. So these raptor bird things / Corvigon, who we come to know as our little baby Ravox in the chapters we covered on Maevyth. So maybe Dolian isn't all crazy. And of course, Dolion's vision hints that the bloodline that Zevander is looking for might be linked to the Corvi people that are descendants of the goddess of death, and that without the bloodstone of the Corvi daughter, Zevander won't be able to break his curse. Our cute little lofty Dolian also shares that he's had a complete change of heart about moving forward with their mission to kill Maevyth.
Sorry, Zevander. Sorry.
Right? Like that was short-lived. So from the book, the quote is, the silver markings on that stone are unique to the Corvicae, known to worship the goddess of death. The very ichor that ran through her veins ran through the veins of the Corvi people. If my vision is correct, the mortal I sent you after could be the first or last of the bloodline, carrying the blood of the death goddess. I cannot break the curse without the bloodstone of the Corvi daughter, and I will not be responsible for ending their bloodline twice. Except pretend that that's like a really ancient old man wise voice. The silver markings. At this stage as well, Dolian shares that the Mage Hood is hunting him, and they are in search of the bloodstones with a desire to possess the Septimere for themselves. But first, they also need the seventh bloodline, and they know that Dolian knows where to find it. So the three of them manage to escape. They kill a couple mages on the way, And that is what we get of Zevander and his friends in part 1. That was crazy.
Dolian, what are you doing over there, Dolian?
I still don't know about him, but I am pumped that we have some clarity. Like, we did have a hunch, but now we know that Maevyth definitely has something to do with the goddess of death. After all of these prophecies from Dolian that we could not talk about last episode, we finally can talk about it. Maevyth totally has something to do with this goddess of death.
Dolian does somehow know where Maevyth lives and that she is connected to this bloodline. So, like, he's got some skills. When he says, I won't be responsible for ending this bloodline twice. So, do they think that it ended once? That must be the assumption, is that it is thought to have ended. But then they know that they can find a descendant because of his visions. Maybe there's more to that than we know yet of, like, how is this information coming to light?
I guess we don't really know what all the different bloodlines are. I know they're mentioned at the very beginning in the prologue. It seems to be the only mortal bloodline.
Yes, I believe it.
So it's linked to the goddess of death, the Corvicae bloodline. And so it got me thinking themes around mortality and death. Could they come up later? Like, what could this mean in terms of the connection between the goddess of death and being a mortal versus being immortal? And I'm so curious how, I guess, in like the larger lore of this history, if we're going to learn more about how there can only be one mortal bloodline.
Right. I wonder if there's something to do with like a mortal being the only type that can understand how precious life is. Like all of these other bloodlines, they can all die. It's not that death does not apply to them. Even the way that he describes Maevyth by just breathing in her essence is like talking about her innocence and her purity. And we don't get that vibe from Rakaya. There's just a bit of a chaotic energy with these other people where they just can take these risks and be a little more vicious in life than we get the sense that Maevyth is, and even her sister and some of the other characters.
Even like up to the part that we're in the book, I feel like there are still a lot of really big unknowns about like the different bloodlines and what they mean, how they're connected to different gods, powers, moon, sun.
It's not a spoiler to say that part 1 is like a healthy chunk of this book, but part 2 is no joke. It is like 20 chapters of solid content, and part 3 is pretty short. So we're definitely whetting our appetite here with what she's willing to give us at the beginning of this story, but there is a lot of potential, and we know that there is more coming. Eldritch is coming out. We have a name for our book. Where that will end, we have no idea, and it may not be the end of this story. We will see.
I am reading Nightshade and I have like 25 minutes to go in this Keri Lake book. It's gonna end on a cliffhanger, but it is coming to like a natural close, I feel. Maybe the same will happen with Anathema because we do have a little while to wait, a few months to wait.
It's going to be up to Keri Lake and what she decides. She's kind of alluded that the story may not be possible in just 2 books.
I'm waiting for her to put out like a big epic. I think she has what it takes for sure. I could see her easily putting together like a 5-book series.
Also, can you create the Keri Lake multiverse? Because I would love it to have a couple little books over here connect to this one over here and create this interconnected web of stories that blow our minds. So we wanted to end with a couple like discussion questions. Let's bring our book club to the table and have a little bit of fun here after this first chunk of Anathema. So let's talk about Maevyth's transformation. She's injured. She has the subsequent healing and a mark, and we see this significant change in her. So how do her new abilities, including her connection to the dead and her scars transformation, shape her identity and her relationship with the world around her? Maybe if we think about how she's first presented to us and then how she's presented to us by the end of part 1.
She was seen as this like person that should be ostracized and ignored and snubbed in her community. But now we're kind of starting to see maybe there is something actually special about her and it's maybe not a curse after all. Maybe she does belong somewhere. So it's almost shifting like, yes, there's some sort of anomaly about you, but it's changing from this negative thing to possibly like a silver lining.
Well,
A silver lining, no pun intended. So yeah, I see that that's kind of like the perception shift for me.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like right along those lines, there's this idea of her being kind of like lost in the beginning. She's staring into these woods, she's yelling, she feels rage, she's lost people in her life, and she's confused. But by the end of it, she does seem to be getting a bit of an empowered feeling. But I think you're right. There is a sense that maybe she has a place. I think our little crone witch friend is nudging Maevyth into understanding that the darkness is okay. There's more for you than what lives just in Foxglove.
Just the little things that she does towards the end to kind of show like a little bit more confidence. I think that's something that I'm hoping she starts to kind of come into her own throughout this.
Right. Yeah, I think we're getting a little bit of a taste of that. She's not willing to just lie down and take it. We're getting this turning point in her story where she has to make these choices. She's either going to push against these things and be her own person and carve this path, or she's going to sit and take it, and she knows where that's going to lead. So she has to choose.
Yeah, is she going to stay with Mr. Morose, or is she going to gallop off into the sunset with the crone witch?
Oh. The raven and the egg. The raven and the mysterious egg play symbolic roles in this story. What do you think the egg represents for Maevyth, and how does it relate to her evolving journey? What significance does Ravox, the creature she names, have for her?
Yeah, I almost see the egg as like a new beginning for her, a new chance for her to like almost be reborn. I feel like it's all kind of bringing us to the fact that she's going to be a bad bitch soon.
And we
She's
hope.
going to be a bad bitch soon.
Yeah, and hopefully Ravox too. She kind of gets like pulled away from the house and thrown at Mr. Morose's place, and Ravox is just kind of left in the dust back in the shed with like a head.
I mean, he pulverized a cat, so let's just hope for the best for Ravox. But if it is a Corvugon, like that's going to be crazy. That's going to be crazy.
I think something that came to mind for me with this question too is that Ravox and this egg kind of symbolizes reality for her. Without that, she's really struggling to understand what's going on around her. She's having these spirits visit her, and she's seeing weird things in the street, and ravens are flying around her head, and she really thinks she's losing her mind. But she's got this egg. She's got this physical thing that is proving to her that like she's not dead. We don't think. She's got something that connects her and grounds her in reality, and is maybe giving her a little bit of a purpose beyond all the chaos around her. So I like that as maybe a bit of a bridge to trust that even among all this chaos and scary things that are happening, she hopefully can hold out faith that there's something good that's coming.
I think you're absolutely right. The poor girl has nobody except for the crone witch and her little tiny raven friend.
Okay. The role of bloodlines and legacy. Significance of bloodlines and ancestral magic is a reoccurring theme, particularly with the Bloodstones and the Corvi bloodline. How do you think the concept of legacy will affect the character's decisions? What role will the seventh bloodline play in breaking Zevander's curse, and how might it tie into Maevyth's journey? It's like they are a bloodline within the mortals that has an exception of some sort because they're derived from the goddess of death. Maybe that's a loose kind of description of who they are. What it feels like is that Maevyth is kind of blurring the line a little bit between a type of person that she thought she was and moving into this other space. There's clearly an essence that she's connected to some sort of ancestral heritage and history well before her time.
How much of that just makes her a pawn, though? Like, in terms of her decisions, this is kind of something as well for Zevander and his inability to properly control his curse. How much of his decisions and even her decisions are her own throughout seeing the dead in her chapter, having that man who's going to be banished run up to her and say, God is death, and the crone witch. All of these people are kind of like imposing themselves onto Maevyth and Zevander too. Like there is a lot of selflessness being imposed on both of them. And Maevyth, especially from like this whole seeing the dead thing. Now she's got Ravox. None of those decisions were inherently her own. They're just sort of happening to her.
Yeah.
So it makes me wonder, like, is she finding herself or is she just following a legacy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We don't know if she is in some way being called to by this goddess of death. So I think that will be very interesting to follow as the story goes on. For right, for right or for wrong, I'm getting the feeling, stemming from some of the things that Dolian has shared, that there is a revolution coming. We talked about this in the last episode a little bit too. Dolian had visions of like a plague and devastation and these horrible things coming forward. And my hope is that Maevyth is connected to this goddess that knows that things are coming and that the world needs them. So my optimistic view on this is like, maybe we are going to get to see a warrior princess who is going to be at the heart of this revolution and find her place.
I mean, who knows? I know we talked about this last time I saw you, Sarah, but we know that the second book is called Eldritch. In the lore and the things that I've read, Eldritch terrors are these old pagan gods. And so I wonder if that has a connection with the gods in this book. Are the old gods coming back for their rightful place?
Can they beckon the gods to do what needs to be done to bring peace and balance back into the world? We get so much of pain and like the class divides that we talked about. The Mancers not having access to Vivicantum, where they basically can't survive. They become diseased, they grow horns, they're living in the streets. It's a horrible existence. So I think it could be very interesting knowing kind of some background on the word Eldritch, that things might get darker, but I think we're in for quite a ride.
Okay, I have a couple theories too, just quickly. And we did touch on this at the beginning, but Zevander's curse, is it really a curse? Could it instead be his key to redemption if he decides to stop suppressing it and actually acknowledge that, yes, he was cast into Sablefire. Something occurred in that process that made it manifest differently than your brother. But in the process of denying that or suppressing it, it's almost feeding the darkness in it instead of allowing him to like fully embrace what that could mean for him. And I just find it interesting that both Maevyth and Zevander are both referred to as a curse. And Maevyth, again, she's on a different journey, but both of them have been taught to suppress that side of themselves. I really would love to see if there is going to be anything else that would allow Zevander to better embrace those powers within himself and how that might change his relationship with his curse.
I think a tool that gets used in stories is showcasing something like this curse and this Sablefire and being very definitive. And like you said, maybe it just needs to be channeled in a different way.
Remember how in the first few chapters of Zevander's part, there was the scorpion and two flames?
Mm-hmm.
Why were there two flames? Could it be some sort of twin flame situation? We know Sablefire, but like, is Sablefire two flames? Mates, twin flames?
I got the feeling in that scene with him and Maevyth that his shadows, his flames have a bit of a life of their own.
Yeah.
You see that sometimes, that like they are mostly obedient but not always obedient. So do they have their own kind of agenda or intuition, or do they answer to someone else?
Ooh, I just got chills. I just got chills in the back of my head.
We might be onto something here.
Well, everyone will have to just hold their horses and wait until our next episode. A lot as well in the next episode. Part 2 is also quite juicy. We will be covering off the first half of part 2 of Anathema. It's going to be chapter 25 to chapter 40. So we'll stop at the end of chapter 40. And we thought about tackling all of part 2 in one episode, but so much happened and we really didn't want to miss any plot lines or details. So make sure to join us for next time. Are super pumped to talk about part 2 with you all. And for now, read along with us to part 2. If you have any thoughts on Anathema or any questions that you want us to cover, please send to songofsinandinnocence@gmail.com. So we'll see you next time.